Welcome to another very cool episode of Topic Discuss. It's going to be a deep dive and a deep discussion into eternal life and what immortality might mean. We're going to dive into emerald tablets, what the emerald tablets were when they were discovered, the Rosetta Stone, Osiris and Horus and Isis and Set and Hermes, Greek tradition, Egyptian tradition, the Book of Daniel, a whole bunch of stuff. So buckle up, buttercups. You're going to enjoy another episode of Topic Discuss. Hi viewers, it's really good to see you. I always look forward to spending time with you, and I hope that you'll stay with us through the entire episode today. It is very interesting and somewhat difficult to get my mind around anyway, and it is the concept of eternal life. And what we think about when we refer to eternal life. For some of us, eternal life relates to a religious background that we may be a part of. For others, it might mean something like reincarnation or resurrection or a number of other kind of philosophical ideas. So when I think about this, I would like to start with really thinking about my parents and their dogs, right? My parents have these two little dachshunds that they love and adore, and those dachshunds are getting really old, and they're going to die. Now, I have a feeling that those dogs don't really know that they're old and that they're dying. And I don't know that they care really if they're going to die, but my parents do. My parents care about when these dogs are going to die and the loss that it will ensue because of that. So there are other animals in the animal kingdom that are aware of their demise, their death, to some degree, like elephants, and the fact that they will take their sick and their dying to a certain location and kind of create a graveyard for their dead. But humans have a unique capability to comprehend their own mortality. And so mortality, immortality, eternal life, and resurrection is going to be our topic for today. And in order to really start this concept and think through why human beings have a need to obtain immortality or maintain their mortality, we'll start with the Epic of Gilgamesh. And the Epic of Gilgamesh is one of the earliest human writings that we have. Predates many civilizations. There are experts that understand the Epic of Gilgamesh better than I do. But the point that I want to bring out regarding the Epic of Gilgamesh is that Gilgamesh, who was this warrior, mythological, king, who had a companion, a friend, a buddy, whose name was Enkidu. And interestingly enough, when Enkidu died in the story, again, this concept of death and immortality, when Enkidu died, Gilgamesh was devastated and, cried over Enkidu for days. And this is and then really what that did to Gilgamesh was made him aware of his own mortality, made him aware of the fact that he is getting older. I mean, not only did he lose his companion, but he understands he is also going to die. His time is limited, and all the adventuring that he was able to do is waning and waxing because he's now, he realizes he's getting older, and he realizes he's going to die. And this is one of the challenges of the human species, really, is the reality that we are aware of our own mortality. We're conscious of the fact that we are aging and that we will eventually die. So one of the stories that kind of came out, or legends, I think, regarding the Epic of Gilgamesh and the fact that Enkidu had died, is Gilgamesh then seeks eternal life, or a way to maintain his life eternally. This is where we get the legend and the story of the Sorcerer's Stone. So in this episode, we're going to talk about the Sorcerer's Stone. We're going to have to talk about alchemy if we're going to talk about the elixir of life and the Sorcerer's Stone. We're going to talk about Osiris and the Osiris myth, Hermes in Greek, in the Greek pantheon, and who Hermes was, or Mercury. We're going to talk about Toth in Egyptian, in the Egyptian pantheon. We're also going to dive into Hermes Trismegistus, who is a character that I have worked towards studying for this episode. So forgive me for my lack of knowledge. I'd love to interview some people like Mr. Horowitz and others who are true Hermetic philosophers who can teach. Anyway, and we'll dive into all of those things in this episode, so please stay tuned. And as we get ready to dive deep into these concepts, I'd like you to make sure you subscribe, you hit your little ringer so that you know when my episodes are up for you to watch. It's kind of like your TV guide, if you want to think of it that way. The other thing I just want to say is it does help the algorithm when you watch an entire episode. And if there's something I need to do to make it more interesting for you to watch through the whole episode, give me that feedback. So let's get into it. Hermetic philosophies, eternal life, resurrection, and reincarnation. Here we go. So back to the story of Gilgamesh and Enkidu and the Sorcerer's Stone, this elixir of life. And I've never really been able to peel back what this elixir of life is. But it is the Sorcerer's Stone. Some would say it's knowledge and wisdom that will help us maintain immortality or keep us alive. But ultimately, there is a quest in the human species to maintain their youth, maintain mortality, and really live on forever. So one of the things that is important to recognize as we explore these different ideas and philosophies is to understand the deep thread that exists through cultures and times. So for example, when we look at the book of Daniel, chapters 8, 9, and 10, I think, Derek Lambert maybe can correct me on this if he's watching, but those chapters are really talking about the fact that Greece became this great superpower across the globe. And Grecian kings, namely Alexander the Great, conquered Jerusalem, Egypt, Persia, and even parts of India. And so that happened around 300 BC. So when we think about our timelines and we think about the different religious writings of the time in Egypt and in Jerusalem and other areas of the Levant and the Middle East, we have to layer in the fact that Alexander the Great was conquering each of these areas at this time. And it really began something called the Hellenistic Period. And Hellenistic period, or Hellen, means Greek. And so Alexander the Great, through this really incredible story, if you want to read more about Alexander the Great than Plutarch is. Plutarch is really the historian that I've used in studying Alexander the Great, but there are others as well. And remember that Plutarch and other historians are writing about Alexander the Great 100 years after his death. And so we get a little bit of mythology and legend built in to, to this figure, Alexander the Great. But what we do know is that Alexander the Great did a great deal of conquering from his home empire of Macedonia and began to conquer across the known world. And when he did this and his armed forces did this, there was, just this lust for power and conquering that Alexander the Great had. And as he did that, we have to remember that the Greeks conquering Jerusalem and Egypt and these other parts of the Middle East resulted in Greek culture infusing within Jerusalem and within Egypt, Hellenistic culture, Hellenistic ideas. The Jews in Jerusalem, Judah, openly welcomed, according to some of these historical accounts, but for all intents and purposes, we'll assume that they openly welcomed Alexander the Great. The high priest did. And as a result, the Jews adopted these Grecian ideas, partly because, well, we'll get into that a little bit later after Alexander the Great dies. But I'm trying to drive home the point that Greek ideas and Greek culture, their pantheon, including Zeus and Hermes and others, really infused into these cultures. And therefore you have to also assume Greek or Hellenistic ideas and culture were infused into their religious texts and writings, okay? So let's just use Egypt, for example. Egypt was conquered by Alexander the Great. And when Alexander the Great died early, and I think unexpectedly to some, he had a strange disease that we don't really know about what caused his death today. But the four great generals, and in the book of Daniel's, these four generals are named the four winds of the earth, take over. These four kings were, well, they were generals or commanders, if you will, in Alexander the Great's army. And they each kind of divided the kingdom up, or the Greek empire, up into four north, south, east, west empires. And Ptolemy became the leader. Ptolemy was one of Alexander the Great's generals, in fact, probably his most prolific general. And Ptolemy led Egypt. So again, this is around 300, BC. I'm being very rough in the timeline, but think about what that means. So now Egypt, who has been led by pharaohs, a country or a nation that has been led by pharaohs in a certain way in religion for centuries, is now being led by a Greek conqueror, Ptolemy, a commander, a general of Alexander the Great. So when I think about that, it really makes me curious about how much of this period of time really began to influence religious thought amongst the Jews, amongst the Egyptians, and others that had been conquered by Alexander the Great and his subsequent generals. And so when you fast forward to the Emerald Tablets, and we find these Emerald Tablets. So the Emerald Tablets are part of the, are found much later. It's probably the 8th century, but the Emerald Tablets were supposedly written by this new godlike figure, a Moses or Enoch-like figure named Hermes Trismegistus. And who's this figure? This figure is mythological, no different than Toth, and Hermes. So let's look at who Hermes and Toth were. So Hermes was a god in the Greek pantheon that evolved over time, By the time the Greeks took over or conquered Egypt, Hermes was, this god of wisdom, a god of mischief too, the messenger god between the underworld and, or between the gods and the underworld, and a messenger god, as we see in his little wings on his shoes or on his hat. Kind of the god of the farmer and the Romans' term for him is Mercury, and the planet named Mercury is the closest to the sun. So when the Greeks, kind of begin to infuse their culture, they're led by Grecian kings in the Ptolemaic period, the Ptolemaic Egyptian period. In fact, every successor after Ptolemy were all named Ptolemy. They're like, I don't know, 12 or 13 Ptolemies. I don't know why, but this just created something called the Ptolemaic Kingdom in Egypt. And as a result, you can see a blending between the god Toth and the god Hermes into this new god, or this new prophet, or whatever you want to call it, Hermes Trismegistus. And so let's talk about Toth for a second. Toth was an Egyptian god who was the god of science, the god of math, the god of medicine, if you will, magic, and writing. So the scholars who were writing in Egypt, who knew how to write, kind of had Toth as one of their deity. In fact, Toth is portrayed with an ibis beak or an ibis head, which is, an ibis is a bird with like a beak that's shaped like a crescent moon. Toth for a long time was the god of the moon. And really what that meant was that the Egyptians were beginning early to understand the moon cycles, the sun cycles, and how to tell time. And by telling time and the seasons, they could predict, when to grow crop, when the Nile would flood, etc. And that really became kind of a scientific endeavor that they attributed to Toth. So Toth is combined with Hermes over a period of centuries, really, and this new figure, Hermes Trismegistus, comes into play, and Hermetic philosophy. So this gets us to the 8th or 9th century. It's the Islamic tradition where the emerald tablets come from. And so the emerald tablets are very interesting to me because when you read the emerald tablets, there's a famous phrase, what is above is also below. And there's lots of speculation about what that phrase means from these emerald tablets. What it is that is above is as it is below. But remember that these are Latin and Greek. The original emerald tablets were found written in Arabic. And when you look at the Arabic translation, and this is probably my own interpretation, because you could say that what it is that is above is also below, could be interpreted as the sun, the moon, the stars, influence those things that are below, which is us, the earth, the water, the crop. But remember that the emerald tablets are really a source of hermetic and secret knowledge that this Hermes Trismegistus had written. And as his purpose of writing it is to teach us how to do a few things, magical things, like the Sorcerer's Stone, the elixir of life, living forever, immortality, reincarnation, and how to enact these things based upon myths of the past, like the Osiris myth. So let's talk about the Osiris myth. I don't want to get off track about that before we move forward. The Osiris myth is an ancient Egyptian myth about a god named Osiris and his brother Set. Osiris and Set fight over the throne, and Set kills Osiris. And by the way, you'll see this scene in the Book of Abraham. If you are a member of the LDS Church, you will also see this depicted in the Book of the Dead. But basically, Osiris dies, and lays upon this couch as a dead person, Osiris, and or a dead god. And then his wife Isis comes over and is represented as a bird, in these depictions, and lands on Osiris to get pregnant from Osiris. But how does she get pregnant from Osiris to bear a new son, Horus, who can now take the throne and overthrow Set? Well, Isis has to use a magical incantation or special words to resurrect Osiris, at least long enough to get pregnant by him and have their child, Horus. So she gets the words from the god of wisdom, which is Set. Toth. I screwed up, Toth. So it's interesting, isn't it, that the god of wisdom and magic and medicine and science knows the right words and incantations to bring Osiris back from the dead long enough for Isis to come and get impregnated with Horus. By the way, it's hard to talk about Egyptology without recognizing that they had a pretty clear obsession with the phallus, and how important the phallus is in keeping keeping a generation continuing on. It's through the phallus that life is created and that you have babies and children. But the other thing too to remember about this scene is it is not just about Isis making sure that there's an heir to the throne. But in many ways, Osiris is resurrected or reincarnated to be Horus, right? So if you think about that, if you're a father today, and I think about that with myself, I do live on through my boys, all of my children. Particularly, I can see traits of myself in my boys and in my girls, and so I could see how there's the sense of I live on, or I'm resurrected, or I'm reincarnated through my children. But that's really what this legend is about. So Thoth is the one who has the magical capabilities to teach Isis or give her the right words to create Horus, or to bring back Osiris so that they can create Horus. So Toth and Hermes really become combined into this new religious figure or kind of an occult figure. I don't know what else to call Hermes Trismegistus. Again, this is not my area of expertise. I also want to be clear that this is not the same thing as Gnosticism, but it is this mythical kind of idea that that science and philosophy and religion can keep us immortal. So, and I'll just give you another example when we talk about the combination of these gods. And I want to reiterate this over and over again, because you can see the blending of gods even in the Old and New Testament. You can see Hellenistic influences in the late parts of the Old Testament and obviously in the New Testament. So there's lots of borrowing and combining and evolving and synchronizing gods, especially as different empires conquer the Middle East, including Jerusalem, Egypt, etc. And we know this is true because, a great example of the combination of cultures is the Rosetta Stone. So the Rosetta Stone has the wedding ceremony between a Ptolemaic king and I think a northern kingdom, a Grecian brother of his, or another Grecian ruler to the north, who gives his daughter, named Cleopatra, so Cleopatra's not Egyptian. She is Greek. And Elizabeth Taylor, I think, to my parents. But anyway, Cleopatra is Greek and marries an Egyptian prepubescent boy. And this wedding ceremony is memorialized in Greek text on a stone, Coptic text on the other side of the stone. Coptic is a language, kind of a shorthand of Egyptian, and then the Egyptian hieroglyphics on the other face of the stone. And that's how really we learn to crack the Egyptian hieroglyphic code. But it's because of the Grecian and this Hellenistic period that really so much shaped the Middle East from 300 BC to till the periods of Antioch, I think 100 or 200 years AD. And I could be wrong on these dates. If I'm wrong, please comment below and clarify for me. I tell you all of that because it's important to recognize how these influences pervade over time. So why do we have a Hellenistic text, Hermes Trismegistus, in an Islamic tradition, written in Arabic? It's because of this evolutionary process that occurs with humans. As a human species, we've developed enough intelligence that we can begin to understand nature, even evolutionary processes, and in some ways interrupt or accelerate those processes. We do this through knowledge and science, and the Islamic period in the 8th century was a significant period of scientific discovery. So some cultures, as science is discovered, those cultures kind of blend the scientific discovery into philosophies and into even religious contexts and religious art. In some cultures, though, science threatens religion, and so science gets kind of stamped out. But in this period of the 8th century, there seemed to be some marrying of Islamic tradition and the Hermes Trismegistus. But there's also a possibility that some of these teachings kind of would go underground, or scientific discovery would go underground because of threats from a power that might be a thing, that might be a government or person or philosophy or cult that might be in power. So what are in the emerald tablets? What's the Sorcerer's Stone, and what's my interpretation of this idea of what is above is the same as that which is below? And if I read the Arabic translation, it is really what it's saying is the stuff that is above is made of the same stuff that is below. I think what they're talking about, what this text is talking about in the Emerald Tablets, is alchemy. Because the thought at the time was lower metals could be transmuted or transitioned or changed into higher metals. And they literally refer to them as lower metals and higher metals. So to me, when I read that interpretation, the original Arabic translation, it looks like to me that they're saying the gold up here, what is above, in terms of hierarchy of metals, gold is above the lead, for example. So the stuff that makes up gold is the same stuff that makes up lead. So therefore, lead can become gold. You can move from this lower state to a higher state. Going back to that original translation, what is above, what is made up of the stuff that's above is the same stuff that's in below. So I see that as this alchemic tradition that you can change these lower metals into a higher metal through scientific methodology, through magic. So as this kind of scientific idea progresses, there are even some, Renaissance scientists who read the Emerald Tablets, Newton being one of them, trying to understand how metals work and trying to understand just the natural world through the scientific method. And it really became an evolutionary process to where we're at today with science. So the other thing that's in the Emerald Tablets is the concept of immortality or eternal life, or the concept of the Sorcerer's Stone. And the Sorcerer's Stone is really a stone of knowledge that is going to keep you eternally alive, or going to make you immortal. And it's really, the concept is that it's knowledge that will keep you immortal. Now, it's interesting because there's some truth to this, right? Knowledge and science has made us live longer, and live longer healthier. In fact, even today, there are organizations like Google and other, that have gotten into healthcare, who want to figure out how to extend life, human life, and extend it in a way that is prosperous and healthy, not just extending life on a ventilator, but extending life thriving in a thriving way. And so that really makes me think about, where does this come from? This need for immortality and a need for eternal life. And I go back to evolution and evolutionary science, and the need to survive, not just the need to survive myself, but my posterity, my species. So when I think about the survival instincts that we have as humans, that we have had in us evolutionarily for thousands of years, and it is as strong as breathing and drinking. Our bodies know that in order to survive, we need air. So the need to breathe, or if we are unable to breathe, we panic. And because there is such this deep drive and desire to survive and to stay alive. Same thing with food. When we're not eating food, for those who are trying to diet, there is an instinctual need to survive. And if I'm not eating, then I better go find food, because I could be without food for months. If you think about our ancestors, water is the same thing. I would also suggest that when we are conscious and aware of our mortality, that same survival instinct kicks in. We are designed and we have evolved to survive. And survival for us changes from that of my parents' dogs, right? For them, survival includes reproduction, food, air, water, and also a pack, sociality. Dogs are social because they have learned to be social in order to survive in packs. That's why they're such good companions for humans. They have a social nature about them. But that sociality is a drive for survival. So with humans, so those dogs are not aware of their mortality. So they are not taking other steps to keep themselves alive, because they don't necessarily know that they're going to, if they inevitably will die. They're just thinking, I've got to eat, I've got to run in a pack, I got to drink, and I got to reproduce. So we have similar instincts, but the fact that we're so acutely aware of our mortality, it complicates our need for survival, because the fact that we know we're going to die compounds our anxiety about survival. It compounds our need for immortality, our need to stay young, because we know eventually it is going to end. We do this with our parents or our grandparents who might be dying or who have died. We don't want to let them go if they're on a ventilator and we know that there's nothing we can do to keep them alive, but we keep them with this hope that they'll stay alive and survive. Now, it is very much because of our love for them, which is deep and abiding, and it's part of our social need and social structure. And again, sociality with humans is also a survival mechanism. But when it comes to our own demise and our own death and the recognition of our own immortality, and that this will end, this existence and what we're going through right now is going to end. And when that happens, or the fact that we are aware that that will happen, we get some anxiety. And that anxiety could produce these philosophical ideas of immortality, and trying to figure out ways to keep us alive, or making up religious texts that describe a way to be immortal or eternal forever. And so then it reduces our anxiety. Okay, if it reduces my anxiety if I think or believe that if when I die I'm going to be resurrected and exalted, or, perfected. Or I feel better about death if I know I'm going to be reincarnated. I don't feel so much anxiety. It relieves this survival instinct that causes anxiety in our consciousness that we will die, that our existence will end. And so we have spent centuries and thousands of years as a species trying to figure out how to reduce this anxiety. And it's because we became aware through our own evolutionary consciousness, our big brains, we became aware that we are mortal. We became aware that we're going to die, which actually added to our own survival mechanisms, because the fact that consciousness becomes an even more powerful evolutionary trait, that in our brains are so big and we're so that have facilitated consciousness, that now we're more likely to survive than these dogs, because we are aware of our mortality, and we are going to do whatever it takes to extend our mortality. We are going to do whatever it takes to stay healthy by exercising. Today we know now that it's through exercising and eating right and lowering our stress. But to, Islamic traditions in the 8th century, it might have been alchemy that was the secret to keeping us living longer, because they didn't have a very clear understanding of medicine, though they had some. And it's the same thing with the Egyptians, especially the Egyptian rulers who had anxiety about their kingdoms ending and their lives ending, and wanting to keep that going through either their children. So reproduction became extremely important. Reproduction of a child that was your own sex, for example, so that a male is somewhat reincarnated in their own child. Not literally, but that's kind of the feeling. Well, my son is taking after me, right? I'm going to live on through my son. So this is an evolutionary instinct that we have to survive, and the more that we're aware of our mortality, the more we take steps to try to circumvent it. It's a survival mechanism. So here's what I'd say about that as well. It is important to respect the need we have as a human species, and really any species, to survive and to thrive. It is important that any of you listening tonight feel like you have the tools and resources you need to thrive in your existence. If believing in Hermetic philosophy and the Emerald Tablets and Hermes Trismegistus helps you thrive, beautiful, go for it. If believing in a Abrahamic tradition reduces anxiety and helps you thrive, go for it. Do it. If not having a supernatural belief of any kind helps you thrive, do it. Because at the end of the day, we have incredible capabilities as a human species to transform the planet in a really positive way, and really ensure that we can leave legacies, that we can live on through our posterity and our children and through the things that we create. There are listeners who may never have children, and they survive on through the things that they create, their art, their religious motifs, or whatever else it is that they create becomes the thing that makes them immortal. So I want to be really sensitive to any of the belief systems that are out there, to anyone that is listening, because I understand and am empathetic to the fact that a belief system helps reduce anxiety. I also am empathetic to the fact that belief systems can also cause anxiety. And so we need to support one another in our journeys of discovery during this human experience. I love you all and look forward to more topics to discuss with you. Peace out.